I did not realize just how much time it takes to be a dad. And that's been an adjustment for me because my lifestyle is very much work, 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 work. Having to flip a switch and be like, okay, work stops for 3 or 4 hours at this time so that I can spend that time with my kid. That was a big misunderstanding for me at first.
This is Dadography, a podcast with stories and insights on fatherhood from dads around the globe, dedicated to providing you with the tools and tips to become a better dad. All right. Welcome, everybody, once again to the Dadography podcast. I'm your host, Corey Ward, and today we have a special guest with us. He's actually the second interview of a three-generational interview that we'll be doing, Mr. Josiah Gunn. Josiah, how you doing?
Good, good, good. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's my first podcast, so we'll see how I do.
I'm sure you'll do well, man. Thank you for carving out the time. I know as a dad, a lot of times carving out time for just extra stuff can be a little bit challenging. So we definitely appreciate you making yourself available for us, man.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
If you would, man, give us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about you.
Yeah, so like everyone knows by now, my name's Josiah Gunn, and I'm a third culture kid. I was born in a suburb of Chicago, Illinois, and at the ripe young age of like 9 months old, we moved to Costa Rica. We're there for under a year so my mom could learn Spanish, and then moved to Venezuela. And I spent really the first 5 years of my life in Venezuela. And then we moved to Panama, and that's where I spent, the rest of my schooling days. So grew up as a pastor's kid. There's a lot that could go into that in and of itself. And then in 2010, I graduated from high school and went to college in the States. And I lived in the States for basically 2010 through 2019. There was a couple spurts where I was back here in Panama, but yeah, got married in 2016. Have an awesome little boy who's 2.5, and have another one on the way coming next month. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me.
That's exciting stuff. Now, you said you're a pastor's kid. We'll definitely get a chance to get into that later. I'm remembering my conversation with your dad, actually, and I asked him if he could please help me to get a glimpse of his father, and so take me into his childhood, and he did that and took me into the jungles of Panama and growing up here. Could you do the same? Tell me a little bit about your childhood and what your dad was like. Let me see your fatherhood experience that you had.
A lot of people have this, I guess, misconception of pastors' kids. They're always the super rebellious ones and all that crazy stuff. But growing up as a PK for me, I think was probably a little bit different than a lot of other people's PK experiences. Growing up as a PK in Central America was very different. I think there's still a lot of the same struggles that PKs in the States and around the world have, but there's some struggles that are very unique to Panama. And so there was the typical PK life where, you spend basically every waking hour that you have at a church or at a church event or something related to church. So, I mean, growing up as a pastor's kid, we were infused with church, being involved in every kind of different ministry you could possibly think of, having everyone over to the house, all that kind of stuff. And so on one side, it was really positive. I really enjoyed it. And my dad was very intentional about, our role as pastors' kids. But it does come with its challenges. And I think for me personally, one of those challenges, and I mean, if we're being brutally honest here, which I think we are, I think one of the challenges for me was just the amount of time that I got to really spend with my dad. As a pastor, you have your personal family, but then you have your church family, and sometimes it's hard to, I guess, decipher which one is quote more important. As I'm older now, I look back at my growing up, and I can really see that my dad did a very good job at placing us first. But there was a really big challenge for me in like the whole, hey, we're your family. Why are you not spending more time with us? And so I think that was for me hard growing up. But then now that I'm an adult and I look back at my life, I see that and I'm like, man, that's a tough job to have. Being a pastor
Yeah.
is a tough job to have. And a lot of times family is affected by that. And there's a lot of times where it's affected and then it never gets over the hump. But, I look back and I'm like, man, we weren't really affected by it. We had a great experience growing up with my dad. He always placed us first. He was at every single one of my soccer games. He was at every single one of my basketball games. He was at every single event that I was a part of. And so he was overall there for us whenever we needed it and made sure that we knew that was the fact. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about my dad.
Let me ask you this, and this is kind of off the cuff, but did you, as a PK or pastor's kid, was there like undue pressure from outside of their family? By that I mean like, okay, well, oh, you're a pastor's kid, so now everybody has a higher standard for you, like you were somehow or another because you're a pastor's kid that you somehow walk in like perfect shoes or something like that. Like, did you get, like extra pressure?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, in high school, it wasn't so much. I really felt the pressures of being a PK more when I got into college. When I went to college, I was studying youth ministry. And one of the reasons I chose that was because of pressure. And it's interesting because in college, feeling all of that pressure, even from far away, everybody knew who I was. So I would get messages all the time, and people would always be like, hey, you're going to take over Crossroads Bible Church. I'm like, that's not where I really feel God leading me. And because of a lot of that pressure, I went into a stage of life that was not very good. And I was able to talk to my parents about that years after, and obviously like my wife knows about all of that. But I went through a really dark period of about 2 years where it was just, I wanted nothing to do with church just because of the pressure. But I didn't experience that until I got to college.
Right. Okay. Well, before we started our conversation here, we both said that, the internet can be a cruel place. And I think just in general, if people have expectations of you, it can be very demanding. So that can be end up being cruel as well. But hey, you made it through it. So way to go.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Let's look at fatherhood style as it relates to you. What's something you misunderstood about fatherhood before you became one?
Oh man. I think for me, honestly, it really just has to do with the time. When I looked at fatherhood before I was a dad, I was like, man, that can't be that hard. Like, there's only so much time you can apply to things. And I mean, I'm talking not just time like diving into scriptures with your kids or diving into anything with your kid. Just, the time that you have to spend with your kids so that they feel loved and so that you can nurture them and show them that you care and all that. I mean, that time is incredible. You have to spend so much time with your kids. And when I had my son at first, it was like he wanted mom all the time. And he's still fairly young. So there's a lot of fathering to happen and to be learned for me. But I'm now, over the past maybe 6 months, realizing like, man, this is a lot of time that you got to commit to your kids. And I mean, obviously, I do it with a happy heart, but I did not realize just how much time it takes to be a dad. And that's been an adjustment for me because my lifestyle is very much work, 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 work. Having to flip a switch and be like, okay, work stops for 3 or 4 hours at this time so that I can spend that time with my kid. That was a big misunderstanding for me at first.
Yeah. We interview dads all over the world, and there are a couple of themes that are just reoccurring. It doesn't matter if I'm talking to a dad in Africa, India, or in this case, Panama. The reoccurring theme being time with your kids. And it's a constant that we encourage dads to, hey, listen, just do something with your kids. And a lot of times we have to take off the plate, the huge things like, Disney World or this vacation trip, and just, no, dude, just take a walk down the street, up the sidewalk, and,
Yeah.
pick up, play, what is it, I Spy or something,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Just spend time with your kids. It's really something that's been reoccurring.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a highlight that we'll take away from this,
Yeah.
Josiah.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, growing up, your grandfather, missionary, your father, pastor, and so when I ask you this question, I'm taking into account your upbringing. Would you consider yourself a Christian father, or would you consider yourself a father who is a Christian, or is there a difference between the two at all?
Yeah. No, that's an interesting thought. It's kind of a weird answer, but I think you can go down the middle with that. When you say that you're a Christian father and then a father who is a Christian, I think the deciding factor in that is, so you've got dads who, I mean, it's sad, but dads who are abusive that consider themselves Christians. So where does the Christianity fall in that? Then on the flip side, you're a Christian father. In my mind, I'm like, a Christian father mold his fatherhood and the way he raises his kids after Jesus and what's biblical. And so I think there could be a takeaway from both. But if I had to choose one in my mind, I'm a Christian before I'm a father. When you look back at my life, I mean, I accepted Christ when I was in middle school, like for myself. Growing up, it was like church, 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 church. My parents believed this, but it wasn't until I was in middle school that I was like, maybe I should just jump on this myself. And I really did that. I was a Christian way before I became a father. And so taking that into this context, I think before you're a father, you have to make sure that you are lined biblically and in what you believe so that you can then produce and be that father that you should be.
What do you say is most similar to your fatherhood style to that of your father?
We're so laid back. I mean, when people look at me and my dad, they're like, you guys have a lot of the same character traits. And one of those is that you are just like relaxed and chill. So I think with our fathering, my dad and me, one of the big things is just that vibe of just being relaxed. You can be a good dad without getting completely irritated and without blowing up. And that is one of the character traits that my dad had that was really, really, really impressive to me. Is not once did he ever yell at me. And so I'm really trying to mold that into my fathering style because, you know, words have a way. And so there's a difference between, how you say things. And so if you're just really relaxed and kind of chill about it and you're disciplining your kid in some way, shape, or form, or just having a conversation, the way that you go about that is really important. So I think between me and my dad, I think that is one of the big ways that we are very, very, very similar. Is just how we handle situations in a relaxed form.
Yeah, very calm demeanor. What's the biggest difference between his fatherhood style and now yours?
You got to factor in the pandemic right now too, because as a dad, I have a really young son, and so the past year plus, we've been locked up essentially, and so I think fathering and parenting in general has kind of changed a little bit. The amount of time that I'm spending with my son is astronomically different than the amount of time that my dad spent with us because of the situation that we're living right now. If the pandemic hadn't happened, I guarantee that I would be spending just as much time with my son as my dad spent with me due to work and stuff like that. But working from home, one of the biggest differences right now is just that my son wakes me up at 6 o'clock in the morning. I spend 2 hours with him before I start work. I work for a couple hours and I have a break and I spend another hour with my son and then go back to work. And then work ends at 3 or 4. And then I spend the rest of the afternoon with my son. So, I mean, that has been a massive difference in just me and my dad's fatherhood styles. Ironically, it's something that like I didn't choose, but it's been a really good thing. Really, really good thing.
Well, I can't stray too far away from the fact that um, your grandfather was a missionary, your father's a pastor, and then now you're involved in the church in the area of technology. And maybe you answered this already, but maybe we'll try to frame it just a little bit different. Did you feel pressure to get involved with ministry work, or was it something to some degree or another you aspired towards?
Yeah. So ministry has always been kind of in my DNA. I had a spurt while I was in college, like I said before, that where I went off the deep end. But ministry has always been something that I've been really passionate about. And so when I lived in the States, I mean, I was involved. I was a college soccer coach, and one of my main kind of jobs as an assistant coach was just to kind of be a spiritual mentor to the guys on the team. So that was something I was passionate about. No one forced me to do that. Then I worked on campus in the student life department, and that was ministry in and of itself. And then now, at Crossroads, being in charge of digital media and things of that sort, there was really no pressure for that. But if we're getting more specific about Crossroads, in 2018, in October of 2018, my grandparents actually came to visit us in the States. And while they were there, we knew that my grandma's mental health and things of that sort were going downhill. And so when she came, we really realized like, wow. And so my wife and I decided that we were gonna, take a leap of faith and move back to Panama. So what happened was in February of 2019, we moved from the States back to Panama. And
Okay.
I was not involved in ministry. I worked at a private school here in Panama, non Christian school, and was involved in their art department and in their PE department. But in August of 2019, I really felt like I just needed to be closer to our house because just things were starting to go downhill very quickly. So
Mhm.
once I moved over to working at the school I'm working at now currently, which is CCA, I really saw a need for a good social media and media presence for the church. I was just like, that's a way that I can serve. And so I jumped in and started to manage the social media platforms. But then the pandemic hit in March, and or it hit here really in March. And that's when my job really kind of took off. And basically I said, hey, I'll run all of this. I'll make sure that every Sunday there is something to be shown, like put it on me. So there was absolutely no pressure at all with jumping into the ministry that I'm currently in.
Corey here, wanting to give you a personal invitation to follow us on Instagram. You can find us at Dadography Podcast. It's really good because you get an opportunity to put a face with the voice that gave you some insight or some encouragement on your journey in fatherhood. We look forward to having you follow us on Instagram at Dadography Podcast. Well, I'll tell you what, it sounds like the timing of you being back in Panama and then beginning to assist with digital media and then the pandemic hitting sounds like you were there at just the right time, almost by design. So, I mean, I know your son is still really young. You said 2.5. So maybe more so than actually doing it, or maybe you're planning towards it. What are you thinking in terms of instilling your spiritual values to your son?
We've been very intentional with that. kind of just like with it's, I mean, hear me out here. It's just like swimming. We started to put him underwater when he was 2 months old, and by the time he was a year and a half old, he was basically swimming on his own. And so, when we look at the spiritual aspect of our son and our sons now, from a very early age, we've done specific things. And so, putting him to bed at night when he was younger, it was always singing certain songs. And so we were very intentional about singing Christian songs to him that, are very childish, but they still have good messages. Now that he's a little older, we have kids Bibles and things of that sort. And so before bed every night, read Bible stories. Before every meal, pray. And any type of maybe discipline stuff that we have to do, we try to incorporate some kind of spiritual aspect to it. And so, I mean,
Okay.
a lot of people, when they think about their faith and their parenting, they don't really mix. But for us in particular, it's been really crucial in that sense. And so, I mean, my wife has been amazing when it comes to that, because she's the one who really deals with his like nighttime routine right now and all that, just because he's kind of attached to mom. But I mean, this kid stands up and he starts singing like Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and does all the motions, and he like there's just a lot of different ways that we've tried to incorporate it at a young age. But I think it honestly it spans from us and our spiritual lives. And so the way
Right.
that we act with each other around him, the other day, my wife and I, we were in the car and we weren't arguing. We were talking, but we were talking loudly because we had music playing for our son. And he starts saying, "Don't fight, don't fight." And we're like, man, their perception is crazy, even at this young of an age. And so,
Right.
we, we're young parents. We're learning how to do things, and we've done a lot of things wrong. But I really feel like one of the ways that we've done something really right is in the whole just making sure that we instill this spiritual aspect into his life at a really young age.
Now, this may be more appropriate for me to ask you from the perspective of you being a son, being that your son is so young. But have you given any thought to how you plan on dealing with things that are contrary to your belief system when it comes to training up your son?
It's ironic because we had a conversation like this not long ago, but when you look at society now,
Hmm.
you look at teenagers now and what they're having to deal with on a daily basis. And then you look at when I was a teenager and what I had to deal with. I mean, it's only a 10-year difference basically. But in 10 years, it's become an absolutely different animal. It's a different monster.
Hmm.
And so,
Hmm.
when I think about that and I think about, the things that we're going to have to try to work around as our son grows up, that is a crazy, crazy thing to think about. And so,
Yeah.
for us right now, if our son wants to watch something on TV, he doesn't watch anything that could in any way, shape, or form resemble violence or sexual immorality or this or that, because we're like, dude, if he's telling us, hey, don't fight, and we're not even fighting, what's he going to take from what he sees? It's interesting to think about how we're going to handle that. And to be completely honest, because of the pandemic, we haven't really been out and about that much. And so, there's certain things that we haven't had to deal with. But, when it comes to phones and TV and things like that, I mean, the way my wife and I were brought up was our parents were very strict with what we could watch. And so, we've decided that we're going to be very intentional, and I don't know if strict is the right word, but there's ways around having cell phones. They make these little phones now that have like four numbers on them, and they're there for if you need something. And so, until he's a certain age, that's the kind of phone he'll have. With TVs, we're probably not going to allow him to have a TV in his room, because I didn't have a TV in my room and I survived. So,
Right.
you know it's still early on for us. We haven't had to really jump on that boat and deal with those things, but it's definitely something we've started to think about.
From having had conversations with a lot of different dads, one of the things that's again one of those reoccurring themes is communicating. And as we're in an age now where there's so much information out there, before where a dad may say do X, Y, or Z because I said so, kids are more inclined now to want an answer, and not disrespectfully so,
Yeah.
but just because they're so accustomed to access to information.
Yeah.
So if you say, well, hey, let's not watch this type of behavior, then there's the why, again, not disrespectfully so, but what I found is that fathers repeatedly are saying, hey, listen, if you can explain things to your kids in such a way that it makes sense,
Yeah.
then that positions them to be able to make a really good
Yeah.
decision based on what you're sharing. So again, not too far along your fatherhood journey, but if you could do anything different, what would it be?
Man, it's probably a lot. Honestly, probably a lot. But I go back to this whole pandemic thing, and the first year of his life, I was working a lot. And so, the only time I really got to spend with him was in the morning, for maybe 45 minutes to an hour. And then at night, maybe for a couple minutes before he went to bed. But when I look at the past 2.5 years, that is something that for me is like, man, I wish I could take that back, and I wish I could have carved out a little more time to be with him. Granted, he was so young that he's not going to remember that. But, for me personally, I'm like, man, I missed some stuff because I was putting my work before being around. So that's one thing that I think I would definitely change. But over the past year, being forced to spend a lot of time with him, but there's some quality time that I'm missing. And so I think over the past year and a half, it would have to really be the quality time that I'm spending with him. I'm spending a lot of time with him, but definitely missed some of those key moments where I'm like, I could have definitely been paying a little more attention when this was happening, or jumped in with my wife and helped with this or that. And so I think over the past 2.5 years, those are the two things that I wish that I could take back and maybe do a little differently.
Duly noted, man. At 2 years old, now there's two different definitions that people use, right? As it relates to 2 years. Some people say, oh, the terrible twos. And then I've actually heard someone say the terrific twos. What's your stance on that?
Yeah. Man, I feel like a doozy on this one, because
Yeah.
there's definitely times where I'm like, oh my word, you are in your twos, and that is, oh. But then there's times like where I was just saying, he has learned more in his first half of his second year of life than we've ever seen in his 2.5 years of life. I mean, he turned 2 in August, and I mean, everything that he's doing vocally now and learning and all that kind of stuff he has done since he turned 2. And so, it's a developmental stage. He's a sponge. He's soaking everything up. And so, in a way, kids are always going to be in their terrible twos, threes, fours, fives, sixes, sevens. I mean, in a way, your kids are always going to have that kind of quote terrible aspect. If you really want to use that word, it's kind of an awkward word to use for that. But I mean, they're kids. They're going to grow up. There's going to be times where they're just like, no. And you're going to have to figure out how to handle that. But at the same time, there's, I think, more positives than negatives. And so, I never really thought about that question until I got this question, and I'm like, I've always referred to it as a terrible twos because it's just a stigma that has been instilled in everybody's brains. But how much learning is happening? How much positivity is coming out of that time? So I'm gonna go and I'm gonna say they're terrific because the amount of positivity and positives that come out of this kid's life right now, they outweigh by far the terrible aspect, quote, of being two.
I remember I was telling someone before that, we just have to be mindful when kids are so small that they are utterly amazed at, almost everything, right? Like, so keep in mind, right? Let's say a 2-year old comes into the house and there's this gorgeous vase on a centerpiece table, right? And that 2-year old walks over to it, touches it, has no clue it's going to fall. But, somebody comes in, pops and says, "Oh," and then you have people, that maybe make a comment, "Oh, the child's being mischievous, they're being bad." It's like, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, like, literally, the child can say, "I've never seen anything like this in my life," right? And they go to touch it, clueless that it could break. So I think a lot of maybe what gets categorized as terrible is just authentic enthusiasm and excitement about life,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
Something as simple as, "Oh, wow, I've never seen that color blue before. Let me try to grab it. You mentioned that COVID has really changed the dynamic of fatherhood. And I know you kind of answered this already, but I'd be remiss not to ask, a little bit more just directly towards dealing with COVID. What has it been like?
It's been an interesting dynamic between my son and my wife. We've had to really, really, really figure out how are we going to make life fun here at home. We live in an area of Panama where we have a big backyard. We put in one of those like Intex stand up pools, and like we've done everything that we could possibly think to do to make the time here at home enjoyable because of COVID. And so just my dynamic as a dad and even just as parents with our son has just been how can we be intentional about how we do daily life with our son, knowing that, we're not going to be going out like we used to. For a time, public parks and stuff were closed. And so, what are we going to do? So, we've been very creative about how we parent. And for me in particular, with the whole aspect of fatherhood, sports was a huge part of my life. I played college soccer, I coached college soccer. I mean, it was my life until a certain point. And so with my son, I've been able to spend a lot of time playing sports with him. For me, spending time doing those things with him has changed. Like I said before, I would get home at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and you know, by then it's kind of like, hey, we're gonna have dinner and spend some time together. But I wasn't able to really spend good time with him. So um, that's one aspect that I think COVID has changed for us in a positive way. But I mean, COVID's had its negative effects on me as a dad. I've got, and I don't even know what the right term for it is, but like a fear of germs. My wife has helped me a lot over the past 5 years with that. And so COVID in general is one of those things where at one point I was like, dude, I don't even want my son to like step outside. But I'm
Right.
like, that's just so irrational. Like, I need to put my craziness, if you want to say that, because it really is kind of crazy, but put my crazy, mindset behind me and focus on what's going to be good for my son. And so, focusing on what's going to be best for him in general, in all aspects of life, has really been a change for me too, because I see him every day. And
Yeah.
what can I do to make sure that his life is as productive and as fruitful and as beneficial as it can be while this is all going on?
Share with me, Josiah, the best memory you have so far with your son.
Oof. There's a lot. There's a lot. There's a lot.
It's all right. You can bring tears to my eyes or a smile to my face. Just share with me the best moment, bro.
I think obviously other than when he was born, I don't really know when kids are supposed to really start talking, like communicating in full sentences and all that. But it was maybe 4 months ago. He used to speak like Yoda in the sense of he would say things backwards. So like eat syrup, no, or like go to park, yes, instead of yes, I want to go to the park, So it was all flipped. But like 4 months ago, we had been working with him hardcore on him saying, I love you. And so he would say like love you or lie you or whatever. But out of the blue, 4 months ago, in his room, about ready to get him put down for bed, and he just looks at me and just goes, I love you, Daddy. And I'm like, where in the world did that come from? And so
Yeah, that's a good one.
I just, it goes to show too, like how much they're soaking up because, you know, he hears my wife and I say all the time that we love each other. We make sure that we say it a lot during the day, especially in front of him. So he starts to really soak that up. But I mean, it was from one day to the next, he was saying 2 words, love you. And the next day, I love you, Daddy, 4 words. I'm like, dude, okay, we're getting somewhere. So that was for me so far probably one of the best memories that I have.
My youngest daughter, and I remember this moment because I was utterly shocked. We were living in Nicaragua at the time, and we had a 2-story house, and so I was coming up the stairs, and she was going down, and she was 3 years old, and we looked at each other, and I winked at her, and then she winked back, and I was
Yeah,
flawlessly. I was like, "What just happened?"
yeah,
I was like, "She can
yeah.
wink," So, yeah, that was a special moment for sure. Well, I'd be remiss not to ask. Do you think you may encourage your son towards ministry?
I think I'm gonna take an approach to this like my dad with me. Um,
Okay.
my dad never once told me you need to be involved in ministry. Um, they encouraged us to do something that we liked within the church, and for me, music was a big thing too. So I played the drums at church every Sunday while I was growing up, and for me that was fun. And so there was never the like you have to do this. I think the lifestyle that we live and are going to live will obviously portray that of ministry. And, I think if we do it right, I think it'll be something that he'll want to maybe be a part of. But I'm never going to force him to be a part of ministry. I do think that ministry is also not something that is necessarily done within the four walls of a church. Ministry looks different in a lot of different ways for different people. The way we live our life, I think, will make him want to be a part of something ministry oriented, at least volunteer wise and stuff like that. But we're never going to force it on him.
Understood. Well, Josiah, I got to tell you, man, I'm really grateful that you carved out the time to spend and share with us your journey on fatherhood. Thank you so much for coming on to the Dadography podcast.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you guys. It was fun. It was fun.
That's right, Josiah. Fathering means investing a lot of time in being a father. It's a verb, so it shows and requires action. The good thing is to realize this early and be ready and willing to put in the time. Be intentional with instilling values and beliefs in your kids. Start at a young age. Read books, tell stories, sing songs, but most importantly, model it in your everyday life. Speak love and show love.
That's right, little buddy. Speak love and show love. I love you.
I love you too, Daddy.
See you guys next week. Thanks for listening.